They pulled me out of the line at the airport, told me my own passport was stolen, and started walking me toward a locked door. I kept saying, "This is my life. This is my name." I did not know yet that the truth waiting for me was so much stranger and so much sadder than a simple mistake. My name is Meera Ashworth. I am 31 years old. Before that day, I thought I knew exactly who I was. By the end of it, I was not so sure anymore. Let me take you back to the beginning, slowly, so you can understand just how ordinary my life had been before that morning, and how quickly an ordinary life can turn into something you never imagined, not even in your quietest daydreams. Part 1. The Flight and the Flag. I had been planning this trip for almost a year. I work at a small research library in a quiet town called Brindlewood, cataloging old letters, ship records, and family archives for a local historical society. It is not a glamorous job. Most people find it boring, even faintly amusing, the way you might smile at someone who loves stamp collecting or old coins. But I love it. There is something comforting about paper that has survived longer than the people who wrote it. It does not lie. It does not change its story depending on who is listening. A letter written 80 years ago says the same thing today as it did the day it was folded and sealed. I have always found a strange peace in that kind of permanence. I had been invited to a research fellowship in a country I will call Velmora, to study a collection of old immigration records from decades ago, records that historians believed might reveal patterns of migration long forgotten by official history books. It was, without question, the biggest opportunity of my career. I had saved for months to make the trip work, packed one modest suitcase, double-checked my documents 3 times the night before, and boarded a night flight with my heart pounding from excitement, not fear. I remember sitting by the window of the plane, watching the lights of Brindlewood shrink beneath me, feeling that particular kind of nervous happiness you get when you are about to do something meaningful with your life. I thought about calling my mother once I landed, about the letters I would soon be reading, about the quiet, orderly life waiting patiently for me back home. I had no idea, none at all, that within a few short hours, everything I believed about my own identity would begin to crack open. If you are watching this, I want you to think for a moment. Have you ever felt truly sure of who you are, completely certain, without a single doubt, only to have a stranger look at you like you are someone else entirely? Hold on to that feeling for a moment, because that is exactly where my story begins. The flight was long, nearly 11 hours, filled with restless half-sleep and the low hum of engines. I landed in Velmora just after sunrise, tired but happy, clutching my passport and my fellowship letter like they were treasure I could not risk losing. The airport was crowded, the way airports always are in the early morning, filled with travelers rubbing their eyes, children whining softly, the smell of coffee drifting faintly from a kiosk somewhere out of sight. Rows of tired travelers shuffled forward in the immigration line, each of us waiting our turn to be examined, questioned, and finally released into a new country. I remember rehearsing in my head what I would say to the officer, the way you rehearse lines before a small performance. Research fellowship, 3 months, return ticket booked. Simple, clean, easy to explain. When I finally reached the counter, the officer took my passport, scanned it, and began typing. Nothing unusual, at first. He glanced at his screen the way officers always do, unbothered, routine. Then his expression changed. It was subtle at first, just a slight narrowing of his eyes, but then he looked at his screen again, then at me, then back at the screen, more slowly this time. He typed again, more urgently now. He picked up a phone without saying a single word to me. I asked, as calmly as I could manage, if something was wrong. He did not answer. Instead, he said, "Please step to the side. in a tone that made my stomach drop straight through the floor. 2 more officers approached within minutes, their faces unreadable, professional, careful. One of them held my passport up, comparing my face to the photograph inside it, over and over, as if the picture might suddenly rearrange itself into someone else. Then he said the words that I will never forget as long as I live. "This passport has been flagged. It matches a document reported stolen." I remember laughing, at first, a strange, nervous laugh, because it seemed so obviously wrong, so easily correctable. "That's not possible," I said. "I've had this passport for 6 years. I renewed it myself, at my local office, using my own birth certificate. I've traveled with it before, many times." But the officer was not interested in my explanation. He was following a system, a red flag on a screen, a set of rigid procedures designed to protect against exactly this kind of situation. To him, I was not Meera Ashworth, the quiet archivist from Brindlewood who loved old paper more than parties. I was a name attached to a warning that carried more weight in that moment than any explanation I could offer. They asked me to gather my things. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my boarding pass twice and had to bend down awkwardly to retrieve it while people in the line stared, curious and a little wary, the way people stare at car accidents they pass on the road. A mother pulled her small child slightly closer to her side, as though I might be dangerous, as though the mere accusation had already convicted me in the eyes of strangers. I felt my face burn with humiliation, the kind that sinks deep into your chest and refuses to leave, the kind you remember years later in quiet moments when you least expect it. They led me down a long hallway away from the main terminal, past posters advertising duty-free perfume and local tourist attractions, through a door that clicked locked behind us with a small, final sound, into a small room with gray walls, 1 plain table, 2 metal chairs, and a camera blinking quietly in the corner, watching everything, recording everything, offering no comfort at all. "Sit down," one officer said. Not unkind exactly, but not gentle either. Just procedure, delivered the way you might read instructions off a card. I sat. My legs felt hollow beneath me. I asked, "What happens now?" No one answered right away, and in that silence, something inside me went very cold, colder than the gray walls surrounding me. Because for the first time in my life, I understood, truly understood, what it felt like to have no control at all. To have my own name, my own history, my own identity turned into a question mark, hovering over my head. Part 2. The Holding Room. Time moves strangely when you are afraid. Minutes stretch out like hours. Seconds crawl by as though wading through thick water. I sat alone in that small room for what felt like an eternity, though later I learned it had only been 40 minutes, a fact that seemed almost impossible when I first heard it. I thought about my father. He passed away 4 years ago, quietly, in his sleep, the way gentle men often go. But in moments like these, his voice always came back to me, steady and calm, the way it had been my whole childhood. He used to say, "Meera, the world doesn't care how careful you are. It only cares how you behave when things go wrong." I used to think that was just something fathers say to their daughters, a small piece of advice meant to sound wise without meaning much. Sitting in that room, hands folded tightly in my lap, I finally understood what he meant, fully and completely, for the first time. I thought about my mother, who would be waiting for my call once I landed, expecting to hear about the beautiful old records I would soon be studying, the excitement in her voice already prepared. Not this silence, not this fear. I thought about my quiet apartment back home, my shelves crowded with secondhand books collected over years of weekend markets, my cat curled up on the windowsill, waiting patiently for me to come back in 3 months, unaware that her owner was sitting in a locked room on the other side of the world. Everything about my life felt suddenly very far away and very fragile, like a photograph that could tear if handled too roughly. I want to ask you something, because I think many of you watching this have felt some version of it too, even if the circumstances were different. Have you ever been in a place where the world simply did not recognize you? Where no matter what you said, no one seemed to believe the truth sitting plainly in front of them? It is a strange kind of loneliness, isn't it? Not physical loneliness exactly, but the loneliness of not being believed. The loneliness of watching your own explanations slide off someone else's certainty without leaving a mark. While I sat there, staring at the blank gray wall, I heard voices outside the door, muffled but urgent. Officers speaking to each other in hushed, rapid tones. I could not understand every word through the thick door, but I caught fragments, pieces of sentences drifting through like smoke under a doorway. A name, unfamiliar, foreign to my ears. Something like Ilana, and then, more clearly, the file from years ago, and then, quieter, almost disbelieving, spoken with something close to awe. She looks exactly like her. I remember pressing my ear closer to the door, my heart hammering so loudly I was almost certain the officers outside could hear it too. Who was Ilana? Why would her name come up in connection to me, a woman who had never left her small corner of the world except to visit a handful of quiet, unremarkable places? I had never heard that name before in my life, not once, not in any letter, any conversation, any memory. And yet something about the way they said it, like it belonged to someone important, someone dangerous, someone long missing, made the hair rise on my arms. A young officer eventually opened the door and slid a form toward me without much explanation. "We need to verify some details," he said, his voice flat, professional. "Full name, date of birth, place of birth, parents' names." I filled it out with trembling hands, my handwriting embarrassingly shaky, the letters wobbling across the page like they belonged to someone unsteady, someone unlike me. Meera Ashworth, born in Brindlewood. Parents, Thomas Ashworth and Priya Ashworth. He took the form, glanced at it briefly, and left without another word, leaving me alone again with my thoughts and the steady blinking of the camera in the corner. I sat there thinking about my father again, more vividly this time. Thomas Ashworth had been a quiet man, a carpenter by trade, gentle and private, the kind of man who spoke more through his hands than his mouth. He rarely spoke about his life before he married my mother, and as a child, I had never questioned it, the way children rarely question the shape of the world they are born into. When I was a teenager, though, I found an old photograph tucked into the back of one of his toolboxes, hidden beneath a layer of sawdust and forgotten nails. A photo of him, standing beside a woman I did not recognize, somewhere that did not look like Brindlewood at all, somewhere with unfamiliar trees and a strange foreign light in the sky. I had asked him about it once, holding it up carefully, watching his face for a reaction. He simply said, "That was a long time ago, before your mother," and changed the subject so quickly and so completely that I understood, even at that age, not to ask again. Children learn quickly which doors their parents do not want opened, even without being told directly. I had not thought about that photograph in years, not truly, not with any real attention. But sitting in that gray room, hundreds of miles from home, it came back to me with startling clarity, as if some quiet part of me already sensed, long before my mind caught up, that it mattered more than I had ever allowed myself to consider. I remember, too, thinking about smaller things in that room. The strange way the mind reaches for anything ordinary when it is trying to protect itself from something overwhelming. I thought about the umbrella I had left behind in my apartment, hanging on its usual hook by the door, and how silly it was to think of an umbrella at a time like this. I thought about the librarian I worked beside, a kind older man named Mr. Okafor, who always brought 2 cups of tea in the afternoon, one for himself and one, without fail, for me. I thought about how he would ask, when I returned, whether Valmora had been everything I hoped, and how strange it would feel to answer that question honestly. I want to pause and ask you this. In your own most frightening moments, have you noticed how your mind wanders towards small, ordinary things? as if reaching for something familiar to hold on to. I think it is the mind's quiet way of protecting itself, of refusing, even for a moment, to fully accept how frightening the present truly is. Sitting in that room, I understood, perhaps for the first time, just how much comfort lives inside the smallest, most unremarkable details of an ordinary life. Part 3. The senior agent arrives. Just as I was beginning to lose whatever fragile hope I had left, the door opened again, and this time, 2 officers stepped in and asked me to stand. "You'll need to come with us," one said, his tone final, almost bored, as though this happened every day, as though I were simply another case number to be processed and moved along. "There's a transport vehicle waiting." My knees nearly buckled beneath me. Transport? Where? I haven't done anything wrong. Please, just let me explain. "It's procedure," the officer said flatly, already reaching to guide me gently but firmly by the arm. The way you might guide someone who had stopped listening to reason. I remember feeling like the room was tilting, like the ground beneath me had turned to water, unstable and impossible to stand on. I was being led toward the door, toward something I did not understand, toward a fate that felt entirely out of my hands, with no one willing to truly listen to the panic rising in my voice. And then, just as we reached the doorway, a woman's voice rang out sharply from down the corridor, cutting through the quiet hum of the building like a struck bell. "Stop!" Everyone froze. A senior agent strode into the room, a tall woman in a dark uniform, her expression a mixture of urgency and disbelief, her eyes fixed on me the moment she entered. She was holding a thin file in her hands, flipping through it as she walked, and when she finally looked up and truly saw my face, she stopped completely still, as though she had seen a ghost step out of an old photograph. "Stop," she said again, quieter this time, almost breathless. "She's the person we've been trying to find." The room went utterly silent. The officers holding my arm let go, visibly confused, glancing at each other and then at her, waiting for an explanation none of us yet possessed. I stood there, frozen in place, staring at this stranger who had just spoken about me as though I were the answer to some long, desperate search I had never even known existed. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, cracking slightly. "I don't understand. What do you mean, trying to find me?" The senior agent introduced herself as Agent Dara Kestrel. She did not look angry or triumphant or even particularly official in that moment. If anything, she looked shaken, the way you look when something you have waited years for finally happens, but not in the way you expected, not in a way that brings simple relief. "Please, sit down," she said gently, gesturing to the very chair I had just been pulled from moments earlier. "I need to explain something to you, and I need you to stay calm, because I know, without question, that this is going to be difficult to hear." I sat, my legs unsteady beneath me. My hands were ice cold, gripping the edge of the table as though it might anchor me to some version of reality I still recognized. If you were in my position right now, what would you be thinking? Would you feel relief that someone finally believed you were innocent? Or would you feel even more afraid, because now you sensed that something far bigger than a simple administrative mistake was unfolding around you, something with roots reaching back further than you could have ever imagined? I felt both of those things at once, tangled together so tightly that I could not separate one from the other, could not tell where relief ended and dread began. Part 4. The first pieces of the truth. Agent Kestrel sat across from me, placed the thin file on the table between us, but did not open it right away. She studied my face for a long moment, the careful, searching way you study an old photograph, trying to decide if it truly matches a memory you have carried for years. 6 years ago, she began slowly, choosing her words with visible care. There was a case here in Valmora involving document fraud and identity theft, connected to a much larger investigation spanning 3 countries. A woman was at the very center of it. She used forged documents, moved through borders under different names, slipping through checkpoints like smoke through a cracked window. And then, one day, she vanished completely. No trace, no arrest. The case went cold, filed away, mostly forgotten by everyone except the handful of agents who never stopped wondering what had happened to her. I stared at her, waiting for the connection to my own quiet life to make sense, waiting for the pieces to click into place. They did not yet. Her name, at least the one we believe was closest to her real one, was Alana Wren. Kestrel continued, watching my face carefully as she spoke, as though gauging whether the name meant anything to me at all. For years, we believed she had died, or fled somewhere we could never track her, somewhere beyond the reach of our systems. But 3 days ago, our systems flagged a passport number that matched a fragment of her old identity documents. That passport number belonged to you. My breath caught sharply in my throat. "That's impossible," I said, shaking my head. "I've had my passport for years. I renewed it myself at my local office with my own birth certificate, my own documents, everything exactly as it should be." "I believe you," Kestrel said, and something in her voice, steady and sincere, told me she truly meant it. But belief is not the same as explanation. And I think once you see this, you will begin to understand why we needed to find you so urgently, why an entire team scrambled the moment your name appeared on our screens. She finally opened the file and slid a photograph across the table toward me, her fingers lingering on its edge for just a moment before letting go. I looked down, and my entire body went numb, a strange, prickling numbness that started in my fingertips and spread outward. The woman in the photograph was not me, but she could have been. The same eyes, tired but familiar. The same slight tilt of the chin when facing a camera. The same faint dimple on the left cheek that I had always thought was uniquely mine. A small imperfection my mother used to tease me about gently when I was a child, running her thumb lightly across my cheek. It was like looking into a mirror that had aged and hardened into someone else's entirely different life. Someone who had walked a very different road while wearing an almost identical face.
"Who is she?" I whispered, unable to look away from the photograph. "That," Kestrel said quietly, "is what we are still trying to fully understand ourselves, but some of the pieces are starting to make sense, especially after we reviewed your family records early this morning, cross-referencing them against files we have kept sealed for years. I want to pause here and ask you something honestly. Have you ever discovered that someone out there in the world looks remarkably like you, shares something invisible with you, some quiet thread you cannot name, and yet lived an entire life completely unknown to you? It is a strange, disorienting feeling, isn't it? Like the boundaries of your own identity, boundaries you never once questioned, suddenly feel far less solid than you had always assumed. I sat there, staring at that photograph until the edges of it blurred slightly with unshed tears, feeling like the ground beneath my feet had shifted permanently, quietly, without my permission. Part 5. The Suspenseful Peak. Agent Kestrel spoke carefully now, choosing her words the way someone handles something fragile, something that might shatter if handled too roughly. "About 32 years ago," she said, "there was a private clinic here in Valmora that handled certain confidential adoption and identity cases involving mothers in difficult circumstances, families unable to care for children, and arrangements made quietly, away from public record. It was later shut down after evidence surfaced that clerks inside had been selling identity templates, birth documentation, and forged records to individuals seeking new identities, often for dangerous purposes. It became one of the largest scandals of its kind in this entire region, though much of it was buried quietly at the time, kept out of newspapers to avoid panic and embarrassment." I listened, my mind struggling to connect these distant historical facts to my own quiet, unremarkable life back in Brindlewood, a life built around library shelves and old letters, not scandal or secrecy. When we cross-referenced Alana Wren's early documentation with the clinic's leaked records, Kestrel continued, her voice steady but careful, we found something we did not expect, something that even our most experienced investigators had to review twice to fully believe. She paused there, letting the silence stretch for a long moment, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, waiting, desperate to know what she was about to say, desperate and terrified in equal measure. Before she continued, and before I tell you what she said next, because I know how badly you must want to know too, I want to take a small moment to speak directly to you, the person watching this story unfold. If a story like mine has kept you here, waiting, wondering, the same way I sat waiting in that small gray room, I would be so grateful if you considered subscribing to this channel. Stories like these, true and strange and human, deserve to be shared, remembered, and passed along. And your support genuinely means more to me than you might realize. Thank you for staying with me this far. Now, let me tell you exactly what Agent Kestrel revealed next, because it changed absolutely everything I thought I understood about my own family. Her original birth file had been altered, Kestrel said, spliced in some places with fragments taken from another birth record entirely, a record belonging to a set of twins separated shortly after birth, one of whom was placed with an adopted family overseas, likely due to complications surrounding the original mother's circumstances at the time. We believe, based on everything we have gathered, that you and Alana Wren share the same birth mother. Not through any deliberate plan on your part, but because of a corrupt clerk decades ago. Fragments of both your identity documents were drawn from the very same original file, buried in a backup registry no one thought to check until now. It is, in many ways, a technical echo of a much older biological truth. I felt my chest tighten painfully, my breathing turning shallow and quick. Are you telling me I have a sister? I asked, my voice trembling. A twin sister I never knew existed? Somewhere out there this entire time? A half-sister, biologically, as far as we can confirm with the records available to us, Kestrel said gently. Separated at birth, most likely without either of your adoptive families ever being told the full and complete truth of what had happened. I thought instantly of my father, gone 4 years now, unable to answer any of the questions crowding my mind. I thought of that photograph tucked away in his toolbox, of the woman standing beside him in a place that did not look like home, of the way his face had closed like a door, quiet and final, the moment I had asked him about it. Had he known something all along? Had he chosen silence over truth, for reasons I might never fully understand? I need to pause here for a moment, because I think many of you listening understand this particular feeling more than you might expect, even if the details of your own life are different. Have you ever discovered that someone you loved, someone you trusted with your whole heart, might have carried a secret through your entire life, choosing silence instead of truth, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of love, perhaps out of some private grief they never learned how to share? It does not always mean they meant to hurt you. Sometimes silence is its own complicated kind of protection, or its own complicated kind of wound they never let heal properly. Part 6. The rest of Alana's story. Agent Kestrel must have seen the storm gathering behind my eyes, because she paused before continuing, giving me a moment to breathe before pressing forward with the rest of what she knew. Alana was placed with an adoptive family that later fell into serious financial and personal hardship, Kestrel said carefully. From what we've pieced together through witness testimonies collected over the years and old case files we have kept sealed until now, she grew up in unstable circumstances, moved between guardians more than once, and eventually became involved with a group that specialized in forged identities and cross-border smuggling. It seems, in a strange and painful twist of fate, that the very corruption that had once separated both your birth records years earlier gave her the tools, and perhaps even the temptation, to survive by disappearing into false identities whenever her circumstances became too dangerous to remain visible. So she used the same broken system that separated us, I said slowly, the words feeling strange and heavy in my mouth. To survive.
while I never even knew such a system existed at all. In a sense, yes, Kestrel said. 6 years ago, during a joint operation targeting document forgery rings across 3 borders, Alana was nearly captured, but escaped during a chaotic raid near the border checkpoint. She has not surfaced since, until 3 days ago, when a partial biometric match connected to an old sealed file was flagged at a checkpoint less than 200 kilometers from here. It seems she attempted to cross under yet another false identity, but this time, our updated system caught the historical fragment linking directly back to your shared birth file. I sat with that for a long moment, trying to imagine a childhood so different from my own that it barely seemed to belong to the same country, the same species of ordinary life. I thought of the times I had complained, quietly, privately, about small inconveniences growing up. A missed birthday gift, a strict curfew, a disagreement with my mother over which university to attend. They seemed almost embarrassing now, set beside the picture Kestrel was slowly painting of a childhood spent in survival, a childhood where safety itself was never guaranteed, let alone comfort. So she's here? In Velmora? Right now? My voice cracked sharply on the last word, disbelief and fear colliding somewhere in my chest. Kestrel nodded slowly, her expression solemn. She is currently in custody at a secure facility just outside the city. We believe you may be able to help us understand parts of her identity history that even she may not fully know herself, since she never had access to the original clinic records the way we now do. But more importantly, she added, her voice softening noticeably, I think, if you are willing, this could be an opportunity, not only for our investigation, but for you as well.
I stared at her, my mind spinning with everything I had just learned in the span of a single, overwhelming hour. 12 hours earlier, I had been a woman boarding a plane with nothing more complicated on her mind than research fellowships and old immigration ledgers gathering dust in some forgotten archive. Now, I was sitting in a small gray room, discovering that somewhere in this unfamiliar country, a woman who shared my face, my blood, and a stolen fragment of my own identity was waiting behind locked doors, close enough that I could, if I chose, walk through a door and finally meet her. Part 7. Facing the Past. I asked for a moment alone before deciding anything further. Agent Kestrel nodded understandingly and stepped outside quietly, leaving me with the photograph still resting on the table between us, its edges slightly curled from handling. I studied Alana's face for a long time, longer than I probably needed to, as if staring hard enough might reveal some deeper truth hidden beneath the surface. The similarities were undeniable, yet the longer I looked, the more I noticed the differences too. Small, but unmistakable. A hardness around her eyes that I did not carry in mine, a tiredness that seemed to live deep beneath her skin, the kind of exhaustion that comes not from a single difficult year, but from an entire lifetime spent surviving rather than living freely. I thought about my own childhood, turning the memories over gently in my mind like smooth stones. Quiet, stable, sometimes even boring by other people's standards, the kind of childhood that makes for uneventful stories at dinner parties. Sunday dinners with my parents, the smell of my mother's cooking drifting through the house, my father teaching me patiently how to sand wood in his small workshop, guiding my hands with his own weathered ones. My mother humming old songs while she gardened in the early evening light. I had never once had to wonder where my next meal would come from, or which name I was supposed to answer to that particular week, or which stranger might be watching me a little too closely. Alana had grown up in an entirely different world, shaped by instability, shaped by survival.
shaped by a system that had failed her completely from the very beginning. A system that, through some cruel administrative accident decades earlier, had also quietly reached into my own life without my ever knowing it, without leaving so much as a shadow of suspicion. I want to ask you something important here, because I think it touches something many of us carry quietly inside ourselves, even if we rarely say it aloud. How much of who we become is shaped by the family we happen to be given, and how much is shaped by pure, blind chance, the country we are born into, the household we land in through no choice of our own, the choices made by strangers before we could even speak or understand what was happening around us.
Alana and I began from the exact same origin, the same birth, the same blood. And yet our lives had split so completely, so irrevocably, that one of us ended up cataloging old letters in a peaceful, quiet library, while the other ended up running from the law under a different name in every country she touched. I thought again of my father's old photograph, hidden away in that dusty toolbox for so many years. I decided, sitting there in that small room, that when I returned home, I would finally ask my mother directly what she knew. Gently, but firmly, without letting the conversation slip away the way it always had before. Silence had protected me once, perhaps, in ways I might never fully understand, but I no longer wanted to be protected by not knowing the truth of my own beginning. When Agent Kestrel returned a few minutes later, I told her I wanted to see Alana. "Are you certain?" she asked carefully, studying my face for any sign of hesitation. "You are not obligated to do this. Many people in your position would choose to walk away quietly and let us handle the rest of the investigation without becoming further involved." "I need to see her," I said, my voice steadier now than I expected. "Not for the investigation. For myself." Part 8. Meeting Alana. They drove me to a secure facility on the outskirts of the city, a plain, unremarkable building surrounded by tall fences and quiet, watchful guards, who barely glanced at us as we passed. Agent Kestrel walked beside me the entire way, occasionally glancing at me with something like quiet, careful respect, as though she understood exactly how much courage this particular walk required. "She has been informed that a woman matching her biological profile has been found," Kestrel said as we approached a small visitation room near the back of the building. "She knows you are coming. I cannot predict how she will react, and I want you to be prepared for that uncertainty." I stepped inside, my heart pounding steadily against my ribs, and there she was. Alana sat behind a plain table, her wrists resting lightly against its worn surface, dressed in a simple gray outfit provided by the facility. When she looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, her breath caught audibly, sharp and sudden, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything at all, the silence stretching between us like something physical, something almost touchable. It was like looking at a version of myself shaped by an entirely different life, molded by different hands, hardened by different storms. Same eyes, though hers carried shadows mine had never learned to hold. Same faint dimple, appearing briefly when her mouth tightened with emotion. But her expression carried a wariness mine never had to develop, the wariness of someone who had learned, over and over, painfully, that trust was dangerous, that kindness often came with hidden costs. "You're real," she finally said, her voice rough, almost disbelieving, as though she had spent years convincing herself I was nothing more than a rumor. "I always wondered if there was someone else out there, somewhere. I never thought I would actually see her, sitting right in front of me." I sat down slowly across from her, my hands folded carefully on the table. "I didn't know you existed until this morning," I admitted quietly. "I still don't fully understand how any of this happened, even after everything Agent Kestrel explained to me." Alana let out a short, humorless laugh, sharp and brittle. "Of course you didn't. You got the version of this story where everything worked out, where doors opened instead of closing." I did not argue with her because, in many ways, she was right. Painfully right.
I had been given stability without ever earning it, simply by chance, by the accident of which family happened to take me in. She had been given chaos, also without ever earning it, simply by the same cruel accident of fate. "Tell me about your life," I said quietly, gently, "if you're willing to share it with me." She studied me for a long moment, her eyes searching my face as if deciding whether I truly deserved the truth, whether I had earned the right to hear it. Then, slowly, carefully, she began to speak, her voice growing steadier as the words came. She told me about growing up with a family that struggled constantly with money, about being passed between relatives more times than she could count when things became too difficult to manage, about a teenage year spent nearly homeless, sleeping in borrowed rooms and unfamiliar couches, before a distant acquaintance introduced her to people who promised easy money in exchange for using different names on different documents. At first, she said, it seemed almost harmless, even a little exciting, like a game played by clever people who understood how to bend the rules without breaking them. Later, much later, she realized she had become entangled in something far more dangerous than she ever intended, moving forged papers across borders for people she was far too afraid to refuse, people who made it clear, in quiet, chilling ways, what happened to those who tried to walk away. "I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me," she said, her voice hardening slightly, defensive in a way that felt practiced, well-worn. "I made choices, bad ones, some of them. But I want you to understand, I never had what you had. I never had someone to teach me it was safe to trust people, safe to believe that kindness didn't always come with a price attached." I felt tears building steadily in my eyes, not from pity exactly, though there was some of that too, but from something more complicated, a deep grief for a life we might have shared together, had the world simply dealt its cards differently, had one clerk decades ago made an honest choice instead of a corrupt one.
"I found an old photograph once," I said slowly, carefully. "My father standing next to a woman I didn't recognize, somewhere that didn't look like home at all. I always wondered who she was, but he never told me, and I never asked again after that first time." Ilana's eyes flickered with something unreadable, something raw. "Maybe our mother," she said quietly. "Maybe not. I don't know much about her either, honestly. Just fragments, pieces of stories that don't quite fit together. A name that might not even be real, passed to me by people who weren't entirely trustworthy themselves." We sat there together for a long time after that, two strangers wearing the same face, trying to piece together a shared history neither of us had ever been given the full truth about. A history buried under decades of silence and corruption and quiet, careful secrets. "I want to ask you something honestly, because I think it is worth sitting with for a moment, worth turning over slowly in your own mind. If you discovered a sibling who had lived a life shaped entirely by hardship, while yours had been shaped by comfort, purely by chance, purely by an accident neither of you controlled, would you feel guilt? Would you feel connection? Would you feel both, tangled together in a way that is difficult, perhaps even impossible, to fully untangle?" I felt both. I still do, even now, months later. Part 9. Walking Away, Changed. Before I left the facility that day, Ilana asked me one final question, her voice quieter than before, almost hesitant. "Do you think less of me now, knowing everything you know?" I thought carefully before answering, because I wanted to be honest with her, not simply comforting, not simply kind for the sake of kindness. "I think," I said slowly, choosing each word with care, "that you survived a world that never gave you a fair chance from the very beginning. I don't think less of you. But I do hope, whatever happens next in your case, in your life, that you get the chance to build something honest, the way I was lucky enough to, without ever earning that luck myself." She did not smile, not exactly, but something in her shoulders softened slightly, as though she had been braced for judgment her entire life and received something gentler instead,
something she was not entirely sure how to accept. Agent Kestrel walked me out afterward, explaining quietly that the investigation would continue in the coming weeks and months, that Alana's case would go through formal legal proceedings, and that my own passport situation had already been fully cleared, with an official note added to prevent any future confusion at any border I might cross again. "You didn't have to see her," Kestrel said as we reached the exit, the afternoon light spilling softly through the tall windows near the entrance. "Most people in your position wouldn't have."
I couldn't have lived with not knowing, I admitted quietly, even if the truth turned out to be difficult, even painful in places. Part 10. Returning home, different. I did complete my research fellowship, though the following weeks felt strange, layered now with a history I had never expected to uncover, a history that quietly colored everything I did afterward. I studied old immigration ledgers with new eyes, thinking often of how many hidden stories might be buried in documents just like these, waiting quietly for decades for someone to notice the small inconsistencies that hide enormous, life-altering truths beneath their surface. When I returned home to Brindlewood, tired but changed in ways I could not fully explain, I sat down with my mother one quiet evening and finally asked her directly about the photograph, about my father's past, about anything she might know regarding a woman who could have been connected to our family before I was ever born. My mother was quiet for a long time, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes distant. Then she told me that my father had, indeed, spoken once, briefly, many years ago, about a complicated chapter of his early adulthood involving a woman he had loved before meeting my mother, a woman who had disappeared from his life under circumstances he never fully explained, even to her, his own wife. She said he carried guilt about it quietly for years, but never spoke of it again after that one brief conversation, and she had respected his silence, choosing not to press further, never realizing it might connect to anything as extraordinary as what I now knew, sitting across from her all these years later. It did not answer every question I carried. Some truths, I have come to understand slowly, remain forever partial, pieced together from fragments rather than whole, clear stories with neat endings. But it gave me enough to understand that my father's silence had likely come from his own grief and confusion, from wounds he never learned how to speak about, not from cold indifference toward the daughter who loved him. I want to leave you with one final thought, because I think it matters more than any twist or shock woven through this story. How well do you truly know the people who came before you, your parents, your family, the quiet decisions they made long before you even existed that quietly shaped the person you eventually became? Sometimes we assume we know someone completely, simply because we love them deeply. But love and full knowledge are not always the same thing, are they? Sometimes they live quite far apart from one another. I still work at the small library in Brindlewood. I still catalog old letters and ship records, quiet paper that has outlived the hands that once wrote it. Though now I notice details I once overlooked entirely. Small clerical inconsistencies that might once have seemed meaningless, but now remind me constantly how easily a single altered document, a single corrupt decision made decades ago, can quietly reshape an entire life, or two lives, without either person ever knowing until it is far too late to change anything. I have not seen Alana since that day, though Agent Kestrel occasionally sends brief, careful updates on her legal proceedings, updates that arrive quietly in my inbox every few months. I do not know what her future holds, whether kindness or hardship waits for her next. I only know that for one strange, unforgettable afternoon, I sat across from a stranger who shared my face, my blood, my very beginning, and learned that identity is far more fragile and far more complicated than any passport or document could ever fully capture within its pages. There is one more small thing I want to share with you before I close this story. Something that happened only a few weeks ago, back home in Brindlewood. I was sorting through a box of donated family papers at the library, the kind of ordinary task I have done 100 times without a second thought, when I came across a small bundle of letters written in handwriting that felt oddly familiar.
though I could not place why at first. It took me a moment to realize the handwriting reminded me faintly of the note Alana had signed on a visitor form the day I met her. A small, looping signature at the bottom of an official page. It was nothing, really, just a passing resemblance, a trick of memory more than anything else. But I sat there for a long while afterward, holding those old letters gently in my hands, thinking about how strange it is that a life can be shaped so completely by paper, by ink, by the small, careless decisions of people who never imagined how far their consequences might travel. I think about my father often now, more than I used to, and with a gentler heart than I expected to find in myself. I no longer feel anger toward his silence, only a quiet, aching sympathy for whatever grief he must have carried alone for so many years, never finding the right words, or perhaps never finding the courage to share it with the family he built afterward. I have started leaving small notes for my own future, little things written down and tucked away. Not secrets exactly, but honest reflections I hope someone, someday, might find useful. The way I so badly wished I could have found something similar from him. If this story moved you the way it moved me to live through it, thank you sincerely for staying until the end. And if you have not already, please consider subscribing to this channel so we can continue sharing true, honest, human stories like this one together, week after week. Some journeys begin with excitement and end in chaos. Mine began in chaos, and somehow, quietly, slowly, ended in understanding. And if there is one thing I hope you take with you from my story, carry it gently with you after you close this video. It is this. Sometimes the most frightening moments in our lives are not the ones that destroy us, but the ones that finally show us who we really are, underneath everything else the world has told us to believe.